Accused killer and self-proclaimed doomsday prophet Chad Daybell's creepy behavior didn't just spring up overnight. It's been years and years in the making. He's on trial for the murders of his first wife, Tammy Daybell, and his second wife's children, Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow. His wife died allegedly at his hands, and the children were buried in his backyard. Today, we'll explore 10 not-so-well-known facts about Chad Daybell, each with its own creepy aspect to it. By examining his past, we can gain insight into how we arrived at this very point. I'm Linda with It's a Crime, so now let's get into it. Now, before we dive into the top 10 list, let's set the scene. At the time of the murders, Chad saw himself as a prophet, a seer, and a revelator. He believed he had the ability to receive these divine revelations and insights from spiritual sources. And Chad and his second wife, Lori Daybell, who's a convicted killer, who, by the way, he also married only 16 days after Tammy died, they were convinced that the world was ending. They believed a massive earthquake would wipe out Salt Lake City and claimed to know the date, the end of 2019. And because of this, they believed that no one would notice the deaths of the others because of the fallout and from the earthquake, making it a big distraction. They believed that the end of times would occur shortly after in 2020. And they also believed that they were destined to lead the 144,000 to the second coming of Christ. Now, before we go further into today's story, I want to say thank you to Care of for partnering with me on this video. Their support helps me to create more content like this, and I'm excited to share such an easy way to uplevel your health routine. Care of is a health and wellness company that ships high quality, personalized vitamins, supplements, and powders conveniently shipped to your door every single month. All you need to do to get started is take a short, simple online quiz about your lifestyle and health goals, and Care of will give you doctor-backed recommendations. It's really that easy. Care of makes taking your vitamins on the go so convenient. It arrives in a dispenser box with individual daily packs that are perfect for a busy routine. Just throw some in your purse or car and you're good to go. With my busy schedule, prioritizing health becomes even more important, so Care of personalized packs make it a no-brainer for me, and there's no struggle with opening multiple bottles. They make it so easy with this all-in-one pack. And speaking of perks, check out the adorable messages on each pack. This one says, "You have to create your own path, and I'm up to the challenge." I take a multivitamin with iron to cover any gaps in nutrients, chromium and apple extract to support metabolic health, rhodiola for stress and focus, astaxanthin for skin and eye health, and a sleep blend for sleep support. For 50% off your first Care of subscription order, go to takecareof.com and enter code IT'SACRIME50 or visit my special link in the description box below. Thank you again to Care of for sponsoring this video. Now, what are Chad's top 10 creepy facts, and one bonus one to throw in for fun? Number 1, Chad was obsessed with death as a child. Chad's fascination with death began at an early age. He found pleasure in killing bees, documenting the experience, and even smashed them with his shoe. Chad said one day, while he was walking home, there was a large park near his house. He said he saw a honeybee pollinating a dandelion. He then stopped and looked at it for a moment and then swiftly smashed it with his shoe. Initially, though, he said he felt pathetic about it, but he admitted he continued killing them regardless. He wrote, "I spotted another one, then another one. I got a strange satisfaction from it. I kept count, and after about a half hour, I had killed 120 bees." Now, there's a reason he gave as to why he stopped killing them or what made him stop, but that's further into this story. His obsession with death didn't stop there, though. In 4th grade, he penned a novel titled The Murder of Dr. J and His Assistant, showcasing his macabre creativity and even earning praise from his teachers. Little did they know. The cover of the novel featured an evil-looking owl, reflecting Chad's belief and obsession with owls, their mystical powers from beyond the veil, and his obsession with symbolism. Owls have been known to be a symbol of death, and Chad was and is about symbolism based on his history. He was also drawn to Alfred Hitchcock and Hardy Boys books, and the Hardy Boys were known for their coded messages, mirroring Chad's inclination for secrecy. And I've said it for the last 4 years that Chad liked to talk in code in various ways. In fact, he enjoys it. And I'll have a list of those videos down below in my coded playlist. Despite his books being categorized as fiction, Chad notes otherwise. He asserts that the scenes he writes about are premonitions of real events. He says he doesn't fictionalize any of the events portrayed, and says, "The scenes I am shown are real events that will happen. My torn veil allows information to be downloaded into my brain from the other side." Now, he authored over 20 books, often centered on apocalyptic themes, and even wrote children's books based on his own family. And his writing and text to Eerie Daybell was cringeworthy, filled with adolescent-like fantasies. One notable example is his comparison to Harry Potter, expressing feeling trapped but anticipating permanent freedom, a sentiment shared before his arrest for his wife Tammy's murder and the burial of Laurie's children in his own backyard. And he wrote this on July 13th, 2019, 2 days after Laurie's husband Charles Vallow was murdered and 3 months before his wife Tammy was killed. The text said, "Tonight I figured out who I feel like. I'm a grown-up version of Harry Potter who has to live with the Dudleys in his little space under the stairs. Every few weeks, I get to escape and have amazing adventures with my goddess lover. But then I have to return to my place under the stairs, feeling trapped. But I sense a permanent freedom is coming." Number 2, he dug graves for a living. Chad began working in cemeteries where he lived in Springville, Utah in 1989, starting part-time and later becoming a supervisor. He was a cemetery worker until 1992, and in 1995, he was a full-time cemetery worker and became a cemetery supervisor in 1996, and then resigned in 1999. Then, in 2008, he was a part-time cemetery maintenance worker and resigned a year later in 2009. And in 2013, he was a cemetery sexton and resigned in 2014, then moved to Idaho that year. And a cemetery sexton looks after his cemetery. His duties included digging graves and keeping things tidy. And although physically demanding, Chad found his job rewarding and boasted about a 4-year-old visitor who called him the sexy one. He was quoted saying, "Taking care of the graves is rewarding, as well as helping widows and grieving family members deal with the trauma. Sad times are always when you have to bury babies. That's always a poignant moment." Chad Daybell. Based on his experience as a gravedigger, Chad wrote a book called 1 Foot in the Grave, Secrets of a Cemetery Sexton. The book's available on Amazon, where it's described as follows. In this entertaining book, readers will meet such characters as a lock-picking ghost, a coffin-chasing cow, a rock band with boorish graveside manners, and Mrs. Robinson, whose leg preceded her to the grave. Each chapter gives a behind-the-scenes look at different aspects of a sexton's world, including cemetery blunders, meddling spirits, bizarre events, and efforts to outfox the Grim Reaper. Written in a humorous tongue-in-cheek style, this collection of the author's actual graveyard adventures is curiously uplifting book you won't be able to put down or ever forget. In the book, he actually dedicated a chapter on myth-busting about gravediggers, and interestingly noted that corpses were rarely buried in the wrong place, and quote, "We don't dig graves deeper than we have to." Now, isn't that interesting, especially considering both little JJ Vallow and teenager Tylee Ryan were buried in his yard. Tylee was found buried under 1 foot of dirt, and JJ had really interesting aspects to his burial and grave as well. And regarding graves, Chad said, "A sexton knows his cemetery like the back of his hand, and a good one will double check himself as he begins digging each new grave. Mistakes are extremely rare and almost impossible. Now, I do love that line for justice's sake. I hope somehow that shows up in trial, though, and the details are amplified. What do you think? Let me know with a heck yeah below. And wouldn't you agree that Chad would know his backyard like the back of his hand, the very place the graves were dug, and he was a cemetery sexton? And regarding his claim of rarely making mistakes in burying bodies, the FBI found JJ's grave meticulously dug. According to an FBI agent, they said, I've probably excavated approximately 5 to 7 burials. Out of all of those burials, this is the most precise. Somebody's taken the most effort to bury these remains. Now, JJ's grave featured wood paneling and heavy stones on top, and it was suggested it may have served as a makeshift vault to hide his body. These vaults are typically constructed by experienced grave diggers to prevent the soil above from collapsing and exposing the body. For JJ's sister, Tylee, her gravesite was very, very different. She was killed first, but her grave was dug only until needed, 1 foot deep, before her remains were discovered, and lines up with Chad's previous quote of only digging until needed. Her remains were discovered charred from being burned and had been dismembered. Peculiar fires were noticed by neighbors and described them as out of the ordinary. According to the neighbor, there was a big bonfire on Chad's property around the time of the murders and reportedly 2 to 3 in the spring after. Also, satellite imagery had shown that the ground had been disturbed in those dates. Now, both JJ and Tylee were killed and buried on a Monday, while Tammy was at work. And I've always had this vision that Chad would stand at a window in his house overlooking the yard with duper's delight on his face, gaining satisfaction in knowing that these children are in his yard. And I do have a series on his behavior. I'll be sure to add that below, and you can check it out. Now, Chad's wife, Tammy Daybell, died only weeks after the children. Her body was found in Chad's bedroom and showed signs of asphyxia and bruises to her body. The neighbor who noted the fires also noted when he saw Chad that Chad couldn't look him in the eyes, and he said he acted odd in the weeks leading up to Tammy's demise. Interestingly, she wasn't laid to rest in the Idaho town where they resided. Instead, she was buried in the same cemetery where Chad worked in the past, in Utah. Also, I have another creepy factor about the cemetery, but that will be further in this video. Number 3, there were 2 eerie connections to missing or dead people. Now, this is going to turn some heads and raise some eyebrows. 2 eerie connections to missing deceased individuals have surfaced, prompting quite the curiosity. One involves a young female who remains missing and presumed dead, while the other involves an older male who has passed away, and the latter has a much closer connection to Chad Daybell, but both do have a connection. Eldon Clausen, a neighbor of Chad's, passed away not even a week after JJ was killed and buried, and he was known to walk along Chad's property daily. His familiarity with the property led to speculation about what he may have observed, especially with all that disturbance of Chad's land, and he was said to be a very observant man. Eldon died on September 29, 2019, due to a pulmonary embolism, which raised questions, especially given the proximity and timing. And his cause of death also was part of that curiosity, since it was the same cause of death as Chad's brother-in-law, Alex Cox, and the timing curiously occurred with him the day after Tammy Daybell was exhumed after suspicion of her murder. Now, it's not to say that Chad Daybell killed Eldon Clausen, but it is very curious, and it's curious as to the timing of it. Eldon died on September 29th, JJ Vallow was killed on September 23rd and buried near a tree and pond in Chad Daybell's yard. Tylee was dismembered and burned, as I mentioned, and buried in the pet cemetery 2 weeks before JJ on September 9th. So the question is, what did Eldon see, if anything? And do you think that he may have seen something? Let me know below. Now, here's where it goes deeper. Chad had a conversation with a woman he knew named Julie Rowe. I've talked about her in the past. And I talked about this very topic a few years ago. Julie, though, was interviewed on Nancy Grace and mentioned Chad talked about killing a neighbor's goat 2 days after Eldon's death. And Julie claims that she can, like Chad, see beyond the veil and has visions as well. And she talked to Chad on October 1st. Here's what she said.
On October 1st, 3 weeks before Tammy died, Chad Daybell called me the first time since March of 2019. I questioned him on some of the visuals that I had related to basically seeing him bury bones in their pet cemetery and having a bonfire, and he gave me a storyline of burying chickens and ducks and a goat that got caught in his fence.
Well, I didn't hear the last thing. Bury chickens and ducks and what?
A goat that got caught in his fence.
So he gave you that explanation. He didn't deny you've been burying bones.
Yes.
He gave you that explanation.
Yes. I said to him, among other things, so did you guys have some chickens or ducks die or something? He laughed nervously with this awkward laugh he gets, and he goes, yeah. I said, did you bury them in your pet cemetery? And he said, yeah. And then he offered up, oh, and we had a neighbor's goat get caught in the fence. I had to shoot and kill it and bury that too.
So Chad volunteers the information and says, oh, and we had a neighbor's goat get caught in the fence. I had to shoot and kill it and bury that too. But he texted Tammy a weird text in the morning Tylee was buried and said that he shot and killed a raccoon. Now, notable, a raccoon was never recovered by authorities in the pet cemetery, only dog and cat remains. So 2 days after Eldon's death, Chad tells Julie he killed a goat. But I have a question. What do you sometimes call an old man? An old goat, right? And did Chad think of Eldon as an old goat? And what do you bury? Secrets. Now, maybe this is a sheer coincidence, even though I don't believe in them. But what I don't like is the mention of the neighbor and another animal having to shoot and bury it, aside from the raccoon. And here's what I'd love to know. Did Chad spend some time with Eldon right before he died? Did Eldon see something on the 23rd when JJ was buried? Did they have any type of conversation? Did Chad feel a threat of any kind? Eldon's family is adamant he died of natural causes. But one more tidbit I found concerning. Eldon helped Tammy and Chad with life insurance, and he worked for Primerica. And Chad and Tammy held insurance from Primerica. And one of Chad's charges is insurance fraud for Primerica. Now let's shift focus to the young girl that's missing. There was speculation about a girl named Kiplyn Davis who went missing back in 1995, and there's been chatter that Chad may have been linked. Kiplyn Davis, a 15-year-old student from Spanish Fork, Utah, vanished from her high school in 1995. Despite attending morning classes and being seen at lunchtime, she disappeared without a trace, and her personal belongings were left behind, and she never returned home. Although she had argued with her parents that morning and hinted at running away, her family believes that she was murdered, and rumors circulated about her possible burial sites, but her remains were never found, and the investigation into her disappearance was revived in 2003, leading to charges against two men named Timmy Brent Olson and Christopher Neil Jepson. And Jepson's murder charges were dropped in 2009, and he claimed to have no knowledge of what happened to Kiplyn. Olson pled guilty to manslaughter in 2011, admitting to moving her body but refusing to reveal its location. And others involved were convicted of lying to authorities. And despite efforts to uncover the truth, Kiplyn's fate still remains unsolved. There was a device called GPR, or ground penetrating radar, which is often used by law enforcement and the Cold Case Coalition to search for buried bodies. And this tool gives a readout of what's beneath the ground, helping in the search for hidden remains. The cemetery in Springville, Utah, was where they conducted this search for Kiplyn. The same cemetery where Chad once worked as a gravedigger and where Tammy Daybell was buried. And this GPR was used to search if Kiplyn was perhaps buried in this cemetery and along with another body. But it gets deeper. It said that the Davis family knew Chad Daybell, but someone on Reddit claimed to be Kiplyn's sister Carissa, and she said that their dad did know Chad Daybell and knew him from the cemetery. And at the time of the GPR search, it was reported Carissa was actually there watching as they used this ground-penetrating radar to search the cemetery. I mentioned earlier that Kiplyn went missing from Spanish Fork, Utah. Well, guess who worked in Spanish Fork, Utah? Chad, in 2009, as a cemetery sexton. And he's quoted saying, I enjoy meeting the local citizens and helping them locate graves. I also enjoy keeping the cemetery looking nice. Number 4, Chad hears the voice speak to him. Now, Chad claimed to be guided by a mysterious entity he dubbed the voice, and said it continued to guide him throughout his life. When Chad killed bees as a young child and enjoyed it, he claimed the voice was what stopped him while he was squashing them. But another voice was also said to guide him, the voice of Tammy's late grandmother, Lucille. He described feeling her presence and hearing her voice deliver a powerful message about ancestral temple work in the LDS faith. He noted that her voice sounded younger than he remembered, but he was certain it was her. And according to Chad, Lucille revealed that she was working as a missionary in the spirit world and emphasized the importance of her descendants engaging in temple work. After her voice had expressed frustration with modern distractions such as technology, including a video game that Chad's wife Tammy was playing at the time, and according to Chad, Lucille urged him to motivate Tammy to get off her butt and focus on the important work at hand. Now, in an excerpt, Chad wrote, "Then her voice got louder and angrier. This was the Lucille that I remembered. She said, my descendants are letting Satan lull them to sleep with technology. 2 months ago in the temple, I told you to have Tammy quit her damn computer game cold turkey so she would be receptive to a message from me, but she didn't. She has more important work to do than play games. We need her desperately." So Chad types out this message he receives from Lucille, prints it off, and takes it to Tammy. And this message / manipulation, in my opinion, it worked. Tammy quit playing her game, and she and her mother spent 4 years doing work on the family's ancestry. And Chad claims that every year on Lucille's birthday, he hears from her. The date, September 23rd, which is the same calendar day as J.J. Vallow was buried. And Chad says he looks forward to her guidance every single year. And I would really love an explanation from him and more on that. Number 5, engagement photos were taken in a graveyard, and they shared a weird favorite song. Tammy was known to visit Chad at the cemetery while Chad was working there. Tammy actually got Chad the job there, and he fondly referred to the visits from Tammy as their cemetery courtship. And it was during this time of their courtship that Chad sought divine guidance regarding their relationship. He was praying to discern if Tammy was the right person for him. And remarkably, after only dating for 10 weeks, Chad unofficially proposed to Tammy one evening, followed by a formal proposal the night before Thanksgiving, presenting her with a diamond ring to seal their commitment, and Tammy said yes. Here's where it gets a little more creepy and a twist to their romance. The choice of location for their engagement photos was at the cemetery, and their chosen song for special moments was called Cemetery Gates by the Smiths. Was it a shared sense of humor between the two of them, or a macabre fascination by Chad? One highlighted lyric from Cemetery Gates says, "A dreaded sunny day, so I meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yeats are on your side, while Wild is on mine." The line "a dreaded sunny day" sets a haunting tone suggesting an eerie juxtaposition of light and dark, and the mention of Wild being on the singer's side while Keats and Yeats are on the other person's side hints at a conflict or contrast between life and death and light and dark. The two meet at the cemetery gates with the spirits of 3 famous poets, Keats, Yeats, and Wilde. And Keats and Yeats, known for their romantic and often melancholic poetry, may represent a more accepting or resigned attitude towards mortality. On the other hand, Wilde, known for his wit and skepticism, may represent a more rebellious or defiant stance in the face of death, which is interesting. So it implies that Wilde holds different beliefs than Keats and Yeats. And any way you look at it, it's peculiar to choose that song and the cemetery, don't you think? Number 6, Chad's tools had murdered teens' DNA on it. The tools found in Chad Daybell's shed contained DNA evidence linking them to the murder of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. According to forensics, Tylee's body was brutally attacked with a bladed tool and then doused in gasoline before being buried on Chad Daybell's farm near a fire pit in the pet cemetery. And forensic analysis revealed presumptive positive blood stains and possible charred flesh on 18 hand tools seized from the Daybell property. Further testing identified DNA on the handles of a pickaxe and shovel found at Chad Daybell's residence. And evidence suggested that she had been subjected to sharp trauma and a chopping type action from a serrated bladed tool, possibly a hatchet, machete, or cleaver, and her remains had also been severely burned, with bones found melted in 2 spots, the fire pit and inside a buried melted green bucket in the ground. And the condition of Tylee's remains indicated a significant level of destruction with blackened and charred bones, and the process of dismemberment and burning likely took several hours to complete. Chad was reportedly watching while the children were dug up in his yard, and he fled as soon as JJ was recovered, but was caught and arrested. And not only that, but while he was sitting in the cop car, he was talking to his daughter and recorded with the cop car cam, and seemed to have a guilty conscience, saying he won't be back home and wanted his daughter to handle the finances, and in my opinion was pretty damning. I'll put that video also down below. Now, it takes a large amount of effort and time to do that to Tylee, both dismembering and burning. Here's a professional and what they had to say about it in general.
The way Tylee was dismembered and disposed of, it is not an easy process. It's not as though you can just take the kitchen knife and finish the job, is it?
Right. It is a very difficult process. And actually what they testified to today that Laurie told her was it was messy and there's a lot of blood and involves bleach and plastic bags. And that's true. You have 5 liters of blood that still goes out of your body even after you're dead and they try to dismember you. And unless you have a very sharp knife or a bone saw, a hacksaw, or a hatchet, it's very difficult to do. And it takes a lot of time.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you brought those tools up, because those tools were actually brought up in the evidence of this case. The FBI expert said that the tools that were used in the dismemberment of Tylee were, in fact, a knife, a hatchet, a cleaver, a machete, or something similar. But even with those tools, if you don't know what you're doing, will it be obvious to the medical examiner that whoever did this was just blindly going about this work?
Well, from the testimony of the anthropologist, there were a lot of cut marks that appeared to be that they didn't know what they were doing. Cut marks in the abdomen, cut marks around the pelvis. You're not going to separate the pelvis with a knife. So it's usually around the joints, as she testified to. And she was in so many pieces. It must have been really chopped after they, did the cutting.
How long would it actually take someone, again, not someone like you who knows what you're doing, someone who has no clue how to dismember a body, how long would it actually take them in, say, like a bathtub setting or a crude setting?
I would say it would take me hours. And I'm not saying I'm an expert on dismemberment, because that's not something I routinely do in my autopsies, but it's very difficult. It's difficult to open up a joint and disarticulate it. It's difficult. That would take hours. And in a bathtub, it's even harder.
Number 7, Chad told friends Tammy would die before her 50th birthday. Chad predicted Tammy's early demise, stating that she wouldn't live past her 50th birthday. In fact, he was sure that Tammy would die early. And true to his so-called prediction, Tammy died on October 19th, 2019, at the age of 49, later determined to be murder. But 15 days before, on October 4th, Chad sends Laurie a text and says he's trying to hasten her departure. Chad urges Tammy to visit her parents in Springville, Utah. He says that he was urged by ancestors for her to do so. She took him seriously and went, even though Chad wouldn't normally allow Tammy to drive long distance, it was said, alone, so this was unusual. And according to Chad's former friends Angela and Melanie Gibb, Tammy was supposed to die in a car accident, but that didn't happen. So on October 9th, she had an attempt made on her life that failed. and she was approached in her driveway while grabbing groceries out of the car, and a man in a mask came up to her and pointed at what she described as a paintball gun. 10 days after that, she died. And Chad claimed that Tammy just passed away peacefully, attributing her death to a severe cough the night before, yet claimed she passed away peacefully in her sleep. He also mentioned Tammy having seizures, although the pathologist found it very unlikely despite her medication listing seizures as a potential side effect. Furthermore, Chad suggested Tammy must have rolled out of bed after death, but the pathologist deemed it suspicious, indicating it couldn't have happened without external force being involved. Now, I did do a video on that as well the night that she died, and I'll have that below. So riddle me this: how could he just look over and see that she passed away peacefully when she was on the ground? And notable, her head was on the ground while the rest of her body was in that bed. He also called for his son to quickly come in the room and had his son pick up his mother's body and put it on the bed. And I don't even know the words to describe that horror and what he had to go through. Chad also had a vision of an evil spirit inhabiting Tammy's body before she died, referring to her as Viola. Initially, her death was thought to be natural and no autopsy was conducted. However, nearly 2 months later, Tammy was exhumed, and it was determined that she died of homicide. And shortly after Tammy's death, Chad swiftly arranged for a funeral and married his mistress, Lori Vallow, only 2 weeks later. And Tammy's death, October 19th. The viewing of Tammy, October 21st. The funeral, October 22nd, which was said to have been very businesslike. And Tammy's friend Alice, who attended, said it was more like a church talk than a spouse would speak about their own spouse. Now, Alice testified that a week after Tammy's death, Chad visited her and her husband, and he revealed that he had met a woman, Lori, whom he intended to marry, describing her as beautiful. Chad introduced Lori to Alice and her husband, and Alice observed their unusually affectionate behavior, which she said left her and her husband feeling completely embarrassed. And Chad implied that Lori had no children and was an empty nester, a claim supported by other witnesses. After Chad and Lori got married, they surprised Alice by showing her wedding pictures. Later, Chad asked Alice and her husband for bond assistance after Lori's arrest. He asked if they would put their property up for bond, and they said they would think about it, and he texted the next day to tell them that he had a bondswoman that would come and talk to them. And according to Alice, Chad mentioned that Lori recently lost a daughter, but he later denied it, saying he didn't say anything about Tylee. Alice also stated that Chad said Tylee didn't like people and didn't like him, and she said she noted that he used past tense. November 5th, 16 days after Tammy's death, Chad was happily prancing and married his mistress on a beach in Hawaii and playing a ukulele. Chad's prediction of Tammy's death, along with his behavior and actions following it, raised suspicions among friends and neighbors. Chad used the $430,000 he received in insurance money to fund his new lifestyle in Hawaii with Lori. Number 8, Chad led a secret combination, aka secret society. In an interview in 2020, released a month before Chad was arrested, and when the kids were found buried on his property, Melanie Gibb, who was a friend of both Chad and Lori's, announced that she believed and witnessed the makings of a secret society.
If this idea of multiple probations had not been introduced, nobody would have ever died, because they would have never thought they were married before. This is dangerous doctrine, because this is not how he works. He works on a pattern. I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. He does not make exceptions to the rule. He has no respecter of persons. And when we want things, we do things that are not always the best. All of us do on this planet. And the thing that's interesting is we've all been deceived to some level. Everybody. So this is a world to learn truth and error. I just got to experience something at a very different level. So I got to see something, what I would call a secret combination, unfold in front of me. And I got to see it with my own eyes. Now, I didn't see people die or anything like that, but I got to see the workings of it.
A secret combination in the Latter-day Saint movement is a term that describes a malignant secret society of people bound together by oaths to carry out the evil purposes of the group. Secret combinations were first discussed in the Book of Mormon, which was published in 1830 by the founder, Joseph Smith. Lori and Chad fit the profile of those involved in leading a secret combination. These secretive groups typically involve elaborate plans, including acts of murder, theft, and gaining power, often without facing consequences for their actions. Their secret society operated with hidden agreements and detailed plans, and often used special codes and signals. Chad's actions certainly followed this pattern. He organized 7 missions to accomplish together. He created a rating system of light and dark, exchanged secret emails discussing various shady schemes, including potential murders. He also used secret chats, logins, burner phones, and his own hidden self-proclaimed portals. He wasn't the only one. These groups often aimed for power, and Chad and Lori believed they were destined to lead the 144,000 chosen ones. They seemed pretty confident about getting away with their deeds, often smirking, which shows they felt empowered by their actions. And because they believed the end of times were nearing, they thought no one would notice the bodies of their victims, and they thought they'd never get caught. And they thought time was on their side and was not for others. In secret societies, loyalty is crucial, but their loyalty started to crumble bit by bit with members of the group questioning what their role was and what this was all actually for. And the inner circle were Chad and Lori, Lori's brother Alex Cox, Lori's niece Melanie Boudreau/Pulowski, Zulema Pastenes, and Melanie Gibb. In an interview with Melanie Gibb, she said, "And then you have this doctrine that comes in that's not affiliated with any Christianity that I've ever read of. And it's not doctrine that comes from Jesus Christ. It's doctrine that comes from the adversary." And Melanie Gibb recorded a phone call, and she said that she believes both Chad and Lori have been deceived.
I do, and I did exactly what I felt the Lord was instructing me to do. And I appreciate you, and I love you. And I never do anything to harm you. And you can have all of this confirmed to you by the Lord.
I have. And my conscience is clear. I feel very understanding what's really going on, Lori. And I believe that you have been very deceived by Satan. I believe that he has tricked you. And I don't believe that what you're doing is correct. I just don't. I mean, Tammy dies, and then your husband died, and then he's missing. It just doesn't sound like God's plan to me. It gives me a gut feeling, like in my gut, it feels weird. It doesn't feel right. I don't have peace about it. I never have felt 100% peace about it. I always felt like a little weird in my stomach about all these things.
You know me, Mel. You know me.
Symbolism was a huge role in this group as well, evident by their choice of symbols like malachite wedding rings, and was said to serve as protection against future threats or negative energies. The use of a seer stone in Joseph Smith's translation of the Book of Mormon parallels Chad and Lori's involvement in translating records according to Chad's mission. Even numbers and dates are significant, but that's another deep dive for another day. Even words were significant to Chad and Lori. Chad thinking he was ever so clever with his raccoon text and baseball references. But it's evident they had a quest and thirst for power, influence and control over the people in their lives, and used the power of a secret society to dominate and influence others for their own benefit and gain, making the others pawns in their sick game. And even to his then friend Julie Rowe, she said, he thinks that he has some kind of priesthood authority or sealing power that has been given to him to perform ordinances that one day will be on the earth, but are not now, and he has no business messing with any of this. Number 9, he was obsessed with near-death experiences. At the age of 17, Chad Daybell claimed that he had a near-death experience while cliff jumping, where he believed that he entered another dimension and encountered a spirit world. His second near-death experience was said to have occurred in his early 20s when he was nearly swept away by ocean waves in La Jolla Cove, California. During this incident, he said he felt a connection with the spirit world intensify as he communicated with his grandfather about future events involving Chad's unborn children. This event left Chad feeling as though the boundary between mortal life and the spirit world remained partially open, blurring the distinction between the two realms. In other words, his veil was torn. He would talk about his near-death experiences and visions when he'd speak at events. But according to one of the first authors to have her work published by Chad's Spring Creek Book Company, she had a near-death experience and wrote about it and partnered with Chad for 8 years. But she claims that not once did Chad talk to her of his said near-death experiences. She said, "He never mentioned he had a near-death experience. We had a lot of conversations, and I would think that might have come up. Having an NDE, near-death experience myself, people come to me and tell me their stories, but he never once told me a story. He only said he had some sacred experiences of his own, and I respected that. Usually, in my experience, if you had a near-death experience, people want to share it because they can't share it just to anybody, and I would totally be understanding." Now, Chad wrote Living on the Edge of Heaven about his so-called near-death experience. But that's not the only speculation of a fabricated NDE. At the end of Lori Vallow Daybell's trial last year, she made a startling claim that nobody was murdered and her children, along with Tammy Daybell, were in fact happy in heaven. Also, Lori said that she actually died while giving birth to Tylee and saw her deceased sister during what happened.
Jesus Christ knows the truth of what happened here. Jesus Christ knows that no one was murdered in this case. Accidental deaths happen. Suicides happen. Fatal side effects from medications happen. I have a different perspective in life because in 2002, when I was pregnant with Tylee, I died in the hospital while in labor with her. They tried to stop my labor. They put me on the table and they put something in my IV, and I felt my spirit falling to the floor. I was standing near my pregnant body, watching the doctors try to revive me, which took them a few minutes. In that time, my sister Stacy was standing to my left. I turned to hug her and was surprised that her spirit was as tangible as a physical body because I knew I was in spirit and she was in spirit. She said she needed to show me some things, and we went to heaven.
However, this claim seems to be a total surprise to her family, as they had never heard this explanation of this event before. And according to Lori's sister, Summer Shiflett, she said, "She has never once told me that she had a near-death experience when she was giving birth to Tylee and left her body and saw my sister Stacy. That has never been talked about ever by her with us." Note, Stacy is Lori and Summer's sister and Melanie Boudreau/Pulowski's mom. She died when Melanie was young. And Summer also said, "I have known she's been in this delusion for a while. It took me a long time to accept that and understand what was going on. I had never seen anybody with a delusion disorder before. I didn't know how to process that or what it looked like, but that's about typical of most conversations with her. It's all about her faith, and there's never any acknowledgement of what actually happened. You can't ever really get any answers, so it leads to frustrating situations." Near-death experiences have happened to many, many people, so I am not discounting that in any way. But when it comes to Chad and Lori, well, one has to guess what's real. Lori also claimed that she had many communications with Jesus Christ and said, "Jesus Christ knows the truth. Jesus Christ knows no one was murdered in this case. Accidental deaths happen. Suicides happen. Fatal side effects of medications happen." Isn't that interesting? Her kids and Tammy. Number 10, he created a kill/hit list with extras. Chad introduced a chart to Lori only weeks after he met her in person back in 2018. He emailed a particular chart to Lori that would become an integral part of their evil plan. Interestingly, this chart was about the people in Lori's life and didn't include the people in Chad's life. Chad Daybell's light and dark rubric is a concept he reportedly developed to categorize people based on their spiritual alignment. In his teachings and his writings, Chad described individuals as either light or dark based on their perceived spiritual state or moral character. Those classified as light are typically seen as virtuous, righteous, and aligned with divine principles. They may be described as spiritually enlightened, guided by goodness, and committed to living according to religious or moral values. Its opposite, individuals categorized as dark are often viewed as being spiritually corrupted or influenced by negative forces. They may exhibit traits such as deceit, greed, or moral corruption, and are perceived as being aligned with darkness or evil. But they went one step further. Not only did Chad have ratings of light or dark, but the numbers beside it indicated the rating as well, specifying most LDS members are at a 2 level, while apostles can be at a 5, sometimes a 6, but it's rare. He takes it a step further and creates a family history. He names Lori the name Elena, who is the daughter of Jesus' half-brother Judas, who married James the Just, and Chad names himself James the Just. JJ was rated light initially, but then turned dark over time. Charles was rated light initially, then turned dark over time. Tylee rated dark. Her father, Joseph Ryan, dark. He died in 2018. Lori's son, Colby, was light, but his wife, who Lori didn't get along with that great, was rated dark. Colby's dad, dark. One of Charles's sons, who's Lori's 4th husband, who was killed, also dark. Now, many ask about if Chad's children was on this list, but here's my take. Most of this list is the people in Lori's lives who she had problems with. And anyone on that list was one by one being taken care of, and Chad's children were grown and weren't an obstacle. Lori's children were. They couldn't run away together to Hawaii and happily ever after land with their money, with children, and they had work to do. But it didn't stop there. From that rubric, they take it a step further and bring up the term zombies, and one who's dark would become one. And the group would perform something called castings, which would be a so-called prayer of sorts to get an evil spirit out of someone. But then they take it yet another step further and give their victims names, the zombies' names. Charles was named Ned, and they had visions that he would die in a car accident, but was still alive, so they gave him a new name of Garrett, then Hiplos. When the castings didn't work, they moved on to murder, obviously. Both Tylee and JJ were labeled zombies, and they were annihilated. Tammy was a zombie and eliminated, and there was an attempt made on Brandon Boudreau, Lori's nephew-in-law, and at the time, Melanie Boudreau's husband and ex. But before this attempt, there was also a possible casting performed on Brandon Boudreau in the summer of 2019, and shortly after is when the attempt was made on his life. According to Lori, Brandon and his history was part of Hitler's group in his rubric, not just named dark, but had the whole history. And Brandon and Melanie's kids started turning dark one by one. And insurance was mentioned as well. Thankfully, though, the kids are safe. And Melanie, though, unfortunately hasn't been charged yet. Number 11 is a good old bonus, if you will. Chad's behavior started off as a child with odd events, and his morbid curiosity hasn't really stopped. In trial and in his preliminary, he's oddly calm when it comes to exhibits. I believe he thoroughly enjoys it, hence the duper's delight. Now, in his preliminary, when he was submitting his pleas for his charges, he also displayed duper's delight. And in recent times in his trial, he had defiance in his behavior when the court talked about Tammy. And he had times that were contrived as well, pretending to be upset. He laughed in court in the past and was making jokes.
This is the date and time for an initial appearance. Mr. Daybell, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Can you hear
I need
me?
you to speak a little bit louder, Mr. Daybell.
Yes, I can hear you.
A little bit louder, Mr. Daybell.
He wears red to his own murder trial, something that wouldn't be recommended, in my opinion. And in one of the days in trial, his lawyer also matched him in the murderous ties. How fitting. Now, when Chad first met Lori, he hit on her, and led with the fact that he believed that they were together in multiple past lives, or as he calls probations. And finally, he used his manipulations and something called his scientific phenomenon known as loin fire, his words not mine, to butter Lori up. That comes from his member, aka what he calls his storm. And one has to ask, what happened to Chad when he was really young? Are there more victims that we don't know about? Did he do all the killings and just order Alex to do the minimum? Or did Alex do it all, or was it both? And why is Chad so put together in so many ways regarding these details? Does he get enjoyment out of it? Check out this video right here on Secret Society and you can see all their inner workings, or check out this video here that YouTube recommends for you. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.